10 ways to errata MAXX C. Number 11 will surprise you. MAXX C is quite the divisive card. Some hate it, some think it's not the worst card that was ever printed, and some have wrong opinions. But banning a card is so negative, and we already have, oh dear, 4 times the amount of banned cards that MTG has and 8 times the amount Pokemon has. Under normal circumstances I would say erratas are the worst thing that can happen to a card game. MTG tried that once and then revoked all erratas, because if you alter the text on a card to such a degree that it doesn't work like it used to, might as well print a new card. Retrains, my guys, they exist on for a purpose. And then sometimes later we can unban the original card, to have a cool old school card returning, when the rest of the game has caught up to its power level. But MAXX C is not the type of card that should ever return, so erratas are no problem, and I have a lot of them, to make the maximum the cockroach potentially acceptable. These first 3 are just boring restrictions I'm not going to say much to, so just limit the amount of cards it can draw. If MAXX C going second would just draw 3 cards, that would be somewhat balanced. It's better pot of read, but that going first. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely needs a going second buff that isn't just this will win the game if it resolves. Another issue of MAXX C is the going third MAXX C. If you have to contest a full board and then also OTK, or your opponent will revengeful combo you when you are barely able to put something on the field, that is just no bueno. So just give MAXX C the Ghost restriction. You can only activate it if you have no cards on the field. Or maybe also even no cards in the grave, so that it has to be the first hand trap you activate. And finally, if the problem of MAXX C is that you can't expect decks to make a board that could contest 20 cards in hand, how about we just make MAXX C a loot effect instead. Draw 1 card, discard 1 card. It's a neg 1 on activation, and after that its only purpose is to scope the perfect hand, if the opponent goes wombo combo. Which, with the insane strength of going second card, would probably still be really good, so that initial neg 1 is also another restriction, that you, despite going second, only start with 5 cards in hand. But let's now go over to the more interesting and adventurous erratas. The MAXX C challenge is a question if you can special summon more than your opponent has cards in the deck, so how about we go from that angle? A deck that can summon 35 times in a turn probably shouldn't exist in a healthy game environment, so let's cut that number down. In addition to drawing a card, we now also banish face down a card from our deck. Not only is MAXX C way harder to play because we could lose important one-offs, but it also becomes lose the game after only 18 summons. Well, 18 summons is still a lot, that's only if you're trying to achieve something. If you just summon for the purpose of summoning, that's a lot more decks who can do that. But maybe 18 times is still too much, but the idea of giving MAXX C a lose condition is quite interesting. How about we punish people if MAXX C didn't draw cards? As you could just chain MAXX C to a guaranteed special summon, instead of saying if your opponent didn't special summon, we say if he summoned less than X times, Nibiru style. You need at least 2 special summons to make an extra deck monster. So let's say MAXX C gets this extra line. During the end phase, if you didn't draw 3 or more cards by this effect, lose 7,200 life points. And if you wonder why such an odd number, Cowboy for game! Now any level 4 deck can decide to put in the utility Cowboy as their 15th extra deck card. So that if the opponent activates MAXX C, they just make Cowboy, activate it, and hope for no imperm. So then win the game because the opponent activated MAXX C. It is interesting to think of MAXX C as a double-edged sword, so we could also do the red reboot approach. It still does its absurd effect, but you better hope it wins you the game. This MAXX C would now read either after this effect resolved, your opponent can add 1 card from the deck to a hand, or if you want to be even harsher, to activate this card, make your opponent add 1 card from the deck to the hand, but it cannot be activated until the end of this chain. The second one obviously heavily punishing if MAXX C gets stopped, as the opponent always adds instead of only if it resolves, with the other restriction just being there so that you can't add Ash, and Ash the very same card that lets you add it. This MAXX C does now encourage the one-off floodgate usage, as you can simply add a floodgate if your opponent MAXX Cs you and then simply sit on it, but with how strong MAXX C is, for once I do not have a problem for floodgate blast. Go! Another thing I heard was that the OCG likes MAXX C because it leads to big dumb combo messes, so how about we give them the big dumb combo mess they want? I am not the biggest fan of everything is just an omni-negate, as that deals with everything and no thought has to be put into your actions, so let's stop that. MAXX C now also says the activation and effects of cards your opponent controls cannot be negated until the end of your next turn. This not only shuts down things like hand traps or droplet Dark Ruler style Go Second cards, but if you activate MAXX C after having comboed, does your board better not contain any negates, as they are now useless. You could even add a you cannot tribute your opponent's cards to it, so that people don't just play Kaiju Lava Golem Ball. Now you are forced to interact with your opponent after activating MAXX C, and some decks like Sword Soul couldn't play through Double Dryden if their life depended on it, as there are only so many starters you can activate. The last errata that isn't going to make me sound insane will be a pot restriction. Xtrav and Prosby have a restriction that makes it hard to play them in a combo deck. Prosby can still be played in less combo-tastic decks, but that these powerful cards aren't played in every deck seems to prove that these restrictions are hurtful enough. Let's give MAXX C an activation condition of now you have discarded, but you also have to banish half of your extra deck face down. If a trap deck going second draws 20 cards, they still only set 5 pairs. And if you aren't a trap deck, you probably can't risk losing 8 random cards from your extra deck face down. Also, while this would mean you cannot just draw into 5 floodgates, going second are floodgates way worse, so this shouldn't be an issue. This one is still going to be somewhat reasonable, but well, let's see for yourself. When the going third MAXX C is so strong, what if there's always the going third MAXX C? Instead of making you draw of your opponent's specials, both draw of their opponent's specials, until the end of the next turn. You want to draw 20 cards of MAXX C? Sure, but those 20 cards better don't special summon, or your opponent will also draw 20 cards when you start playing. MAXX C will from now on always come in pairs, if you want it or not. But I had enough of reasonable restrictions. You want MAXX C that badly, then take it or leave it. This will be my last offer. Whenever your opponent special summons, both players draw. If combo decks are so consistent, surely letting them draw off their own summons isn't going to help them in any way, shape or form. Also, the MAXX C challenge now becomes quite realistic to do for any deck. And you know what? Screw it. If you want to draw off MAXX C without some stupid restriction or downside, oh, I will let you draw off MAXX C. I'll let you draw every card ever printed in every card game. From now on, MAXX C is not going to draw off special summons. It's going to draw off any summons. No more Flu is immune to MAXX C. Also, it's going to draw off setting cards. You think your Floodgate deck is safe? And it's also going to draw off activating cards, discarding cards, shuffling cards, banishing cards. It's even going to draw off your opponent's drawing or adding cards. Do you think you have the balls to activate MAXX C now, when 35 game actions will kill you? Do you have the balls to activate MAXX C, when the basic sprite combi without any extension draws you 14 cards? And then finally, I also guess a way of rattling MAXX C would be, just do this. MAXX C is now an ignition effect. This will stop, I don't know, branded in red?